Patrik Laine does not want to play in Columbus, but does that really mean he wants to play in Winnipeg? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on our social media accounts. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we're going to open up with some stuff about Laine. Obviously, let's just get this out of the way. Nothing has been officially confirmed as far as a trade is concerned, but Laine has basically told the Blue Jackets he doesn't want to play in Columbus anymore, which interesting that he's now the second player involved in the Dubois-Laine trade to now want out of Columbus. But given how bad that team is and how far afield it kind of seems like Laine has been since he was essentially made one of their centerpieces, I suspect something definitely went down behind the scenes, right? The locker room, one way or another, did not embrace him the way that he was hoping over the years, and it seems like there's even been some internal conflict that actually goes beyond just Laine. So I don't think it's just him that is feeling the pressure. But before we dive into where he actually wants to go, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, because as the playoffs wind down and the sports stop sportsing like we want them to, obviously you might be looking for something to do. But FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus anyways, daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, Patrik Laine does not want to play in Columbus, but does that mean he wants to play in Winnipeg? Winnipeg Sports Talk a few months ago suggested that mutually there was a level of respect and consideration for both the Jets and Laine, and that perhaps the bridges that were burned, when Laine left a few years ago, weren't actually burned per se. More so that Laine had just had enough of Maurice and, some of the team's leadership, and he wanted a change of scenery. He didn't like playing with these guys. And given that he had, such a significant mental health challenge while in Columbus, it does kind of make sense as to why he might have wanted to leave the Jets. If that pressure in the room were starting to get to him, I totally get it. And I think it adds a lot of context for why he might have backed out. But would you want to come back? And I guess that's a weird question, right? On the one hand, I think the answer is yes. Laine has always kind of thought of the Jets, I guess Winnipeg, generally speaking, relatively fondly. As far as anyone knows, he seems to like Winnipeg. He liked the team, generally speaking, from what I understand. And it seems like if the rumors are true, he wouldn't be opposed to reconsidering a return. I don't know that I ever really had this on my bingo card a couple of years ago. We've always joked about it, but I think seriously considering whether Laine would come back was not something that any of us, I would have imagined, had really considered as a real possibility. And for once, I do think that there is a genuine chance that this could happen. But I think the biggest question is, would the fit make sense, right? Because Laine is going to come in. At this point, we don't really know what his level of play is going to be like. I like him a lot, but I think at this point, right, with those 2 years remaining at an 8+ million cap hit and a lengthy injury history, a lack of game form for not having basically played in a year, there's a lot that, for me, kind of drives his value down pretty far. And it makes me wonder if a team that should treat him more like just a cap dump would be better suited, right? I guess the challenge is there's just not that many teams out there that would probably take his contract on. I think San Jose has used almost all of their retention spots, if not all of them. So it's not like they could really, hang some of that salary in there and kind of deal him again, or use them as, sort of as like a laundering kind of thing, right? They can't really do that, and so for Laine, right, he's basically going to have to move either with this whole contract or a little bit shaved off the top to go to a contender, and that's kind of where I guess the question is, how much then would you have to pay up to have Laine's retained deal? And, for me, I don't really want the Jets to be throwing a lot of assets at Columbus for this. But, I do recall the McGroarty framework being kind of one of the starting points if you were to get back a really big asset from the Blue Jackets. Now, I guess the other part of this is if the Jets don't want to give up any of their prospects or major picks, then maybe you do like a third or a fourth rounder and some roster player as a cap exchange, like a salary exchange, to bring Laine in. But with Perfetti also needing a contract extension, Pionk's salary kind of sitting there, Iafalo's salary sitting there, I just, I don't quite know how that all really cuts out in terms of the front office's approach. I could see it happening, but I think at this point, it wouldn't be challenging. It would just ask the Jets to do some stuff that I don't think that they're always interested in doing. But this time, maybe they'll make an exception, because we're talking about Patrik Laine, who is very beloved by the fans. And honestly, I think if you brought him back, I know that there are plenty of commenters on here who don't love him, but I think that the majority of the fan base would actually pay to see him in person again. I think Laine has a particularly unique marketing draw that for Jets fans, he'll never really lose. It's that booming shot that makes you think of some of the great goal scorers like Hawerchuk and, Solani. He's got that absolutely crazy release, a personality that's ice cool, but it seems like he's also just a generally happy guy, and he's one of the few players that's come to Winnipeg, whether through draft or trade or what have you, and he actually put out like a Players Tribune piece on Winnipeg being good. So at that point, he was already sort of endeared to the fan base. And if he really is open to coming back, his best friend is here in Ehlers. Ville Heinola could be a future teammate for Team Finland in the upcoming Four Nations tournament and the Olympics in a couple of years. So, perhaps there is some draw to coming back, and he'd also get to play with Brad Lambert, who looks like another potential future Team Finland player. So for me, I think that there's I guess some mutual interest. For Laine, I just wonder if he's also thinking about maybe just going somewhere he hasn't been, trying something new, and seeing if that doesn't shake out. He's got 2 years left. He can maybe give it a try, and if things don't work out, maybe he then decides maybe a free agent deal with the Jets or something makes sense. I don't know. For me, though, I mean, all I know is that I'd certainly welcome him back. I know a lot of people are sort of mixed on it. But for me, I like the risk. I think that there is definitely a healthy amount of risk involved with it. But for entirely sentimental reasons, and also with the, the thought process that maybe he could rekindle his greatness with the Jets, I would be into it for the right price. So color me intrigued, but we're just going to have to keep an eye on it. If Laine really does want a fresh start, that's, with a team that he's never been with, he'll have not many choices. So the Jets might honestly be one of his best picks if he's trying for something a little bit different. Now, I did just talk a little bit about McGroarty, and obviously Rucker is still out there. His situation is still unresolved. But I thought, one trade partner that I've kind of considered in the past, it's Utah, right? And Utah doesn't really get spoken of much with respect to McGroarty, but this was a team that had made a big deal about making a big splash in its first season. They made lots of acquisitions. They made some big signings. I don't know if any of them were particularly great moves, but, whatever. But they've got some players of interest for the Jets, and a couple of guys that I've sort of homed in on over the past couple of seasons, and wondering if any of them might be available in a McGroarty exchange. If you're talking about a big power move, something that's ready to shock and shake the world, maybe this could be a way to do it. We'll chat about what that might look like in just a quick moment, but before we go any further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to right now. I'm still waiting for the NHL season to get here. Obviously, preseason's coming up in a little bit, which on some episodes this week we'll talk about and what to expect. But obviously, we're still just waiting for hockey to return. There's plenty of other soccer, like other sports that are coming back. Soccer's about to hit big time. For me as a Bundesliga fan, it's great. But maybe your favorite sport hasn't come back. Well, FanDuel still wants to help you keep the sports going anyways whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Go to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode of Locked On Jets, as we're just kind of chatting a little bit about, some off-season stuff, maybe some slight updates on some of the trade rumors and whatnot. But obviously one of the biggest ones for the Jets remains the Rutger-McGroarty question. I want to dive into one particular trade partner that maybe hasn't gotten as much attention, a team that, could make a lot of sense for a big splash, but for whatever reason just hasn't been getting a lot of discussion as a landing spot, despite actually having some real roster assets the Jets might be interested in. We'll chat about why Utah could make sense in just a moment, but before we go too much further, just wanted to say thanks again for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day. For your second listen, I encourage you to check out the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, I just mentioned that McGroarty might make sense for the Utah Hockey Club. This is a squad that's got a lot of solid roster players, but, outside of like Clayton Keller and maybe you could argue Mikhail Sergachev, Dylan Guenther at some point, Logan Cooley too, you start to realize the further you go, there's a little bit less top-end talent. I mean, they've got, Matias Maccelli, who's pretty nice, and I think they've had some pretty decent draft prospects over the years. I guess the most notable thing outside of their forwards that you tend to get with them is their goaltending. They always seem to have a really good pro goalie development pipeline for one reason or another. But, for Utah, they're kind of needing like a big young prospect to join this pool. In my mind, I think that they've got lots of really solid roster players, but in terms of guys outside of like the big 3 or 4 skaters, they just don't really have anyone that I think, most folks get really jazzed about. Unless you love Kerfoot or Krause or something of that nature. And, Krause is good. I just don't think that this is like the world's most exciting talent pool to work with right now. And the way that, Utah sort of used its cap space, they made a number of acquisitions, and I don't know that they really got better in the traditional sense. But I guess, the assets that they've acquired, they did spend. I don't know if they really made the right choice, but they definitely did something. As far as what, might make sense for a trade between these two parties, though, I've kind of looked at a couple of guys, right? Nick Schmaltz is one of the biggest performers on this team. He's been very good for many years. The Jets have obviously had interest in Schmaltz for a couple of seasons, as far as we know. It seems like at one point they were trying to trade for him when he was still technically a Yote. But I think at this point, Schmaltz is in the final 2 years of his deal. He costs a little bit less than $6 million per season. And for a guy who provides you really good top 6 to middle 6 production in a 2C role, I think he would actually make a lot of sense as a real solution to Winnipeg's middle or I guess your second line center question, right? Look, you might have two 2Cs in, both Scheifele and Schmaltz, but it's better than, trying to force Nemesnikov into this role. Now, I like Nemesnikov, and I think he's actually underrated, but, in an ideal world, he's probably not your 2C. Better as a 3 or a 4C, right? Or, somewhere in your depth wings. All that said, he can do it, and he's done a really capable job. But I think getting an upgrade where you could maybe get Schmaltz and maybe look at some assets, maybe some draft picks or something as part of a McGroarty package could be of interest. Another guy that might make even more sense is Barrett Hayton. Now, Hayton hasn't exactly been the craziest player so far in his career. He's a really solid middle six center, and I think in a lot of ways, at the age of 24, he could be, still holding some potential for the future. But I think, you have 3 seasons of games over the past couple of years, roughly speaking. He's got 209 career games, 84 points. So not exactly crazy scoring rates. And I think for the amount of ice time that he tends to get and the level of production that he's put together, he had one season over like 20 points. That was the year before last, which was a full year for him. He had 43 points. So again, solid production, nothing crazy. But if you're betting on him to kind of improve from what looks like modest third line production, maybe, coming to the Jets, coming to a more supportive environment, a much stronger team, maybe that would actually be a huge improvement. He's had, a decent run of production on the power play, and maybe you could get his even strength scoring up. But I just feel like, with Hayton, right, the question is, would he want to resign after his couple of years are done? But he is also only costing you $2.65 million against the cap for the next couple of seasons. It's a really cheap bridge. If the Jets were to try for it and to see if Hayton might have a little bit of untapped potential in the tank, it could make a lot of sense for both sides. McGroarty would be a big piece for this Utah squad, and I think Hayton could be a potential solution to the second line center problem. If nothing else, he just offers you another 3C with some scoring upside. Again, not the sexiest trade package, I would say. I also have kind of wondered about Krause maybe. Krause is a pretty prolific scorer. He plays a very simple game, but it's been very effective for Arizona and Utah now. So, with contract control with him for 3 years at a little over $4 million, he's a really good value proposition. I mean, he went from being a player who was seemingly overpaid to actually more than matching what his contract price tag is. It's actually, I would say, a pretty cheap contract relative to his production. So, the only thing with Krause is how long can he sustain, the crazy shooting that he's had the last couple of seasons. But I think if he comes to Winnipeg, he'd probably do just fine. And it gives you another top 6 scorer to give you also a surprisingly physical edge with his chippy and forechecking nature. So, for a team that, I don't really think gets a lot of discussion as far as a landing destination for somebody like, for like a McGroarty type, I actually think, Utah has a lot of players who have some center skill that could actually improve Winnipeg's top 9. Now, again, I don't know that there's anyone here that's immediately going to rise to the occasion as your top end 2C, but if you don't necessarily trust Nemesnikov and you think that Lambert's a little more distant, or maybe not even a center at the NHL level, well, perhaps this could be a way to do it. And McGroarty would probably be willing to go to Utah. Big, exciting new team, big new market. And he's a Midwestern kid, so it's not like moving out to Salt Lake City is going to be a crazy, crazy departure from what he's used to. Maybe this could be a legit fit for both parties. But in terms of like futures and stuff, I think Utah doesn't have a load at this point. So you'd probably have to kind of work around the sort of a trade return. But if the Jets are trying to get a roster player, I think this is probably one of the top places I would go shopping. I don't know if there's anyone else that's going to have as many reasonably intriguing options for your center role, guys with legit upside, and they're not tied up in like $6 billion across like 10 years of contract terms. So there's something there, right? Something to consider. Now, Ken Wiebe put out an article recently about another center option from the Calgary Flames, and this one I thought I'd take a look at and chat about because my gut reaction was, heck no, no way, never happening, doesn't make sense. It's Nazem Kadri, right? And I was kind of like, man, I just don't see it. But the thing with Kadri is that, despite being 33, he is still insanely productive. He had a 75-point season last year. He's had, 50 or more points in his last 3 seasons. So the question becomes, how much is too much for his contract status? And we'll chat about that in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, did want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Just like building a championship team, you've got to have the right roster components, not only for your championship team, but also your car. eBay Motors has superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has your back. With over 122 million parts for your number one vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting a little bit about, some trade rumors and stuff. And one interesting suggestion that came out of an article from Ken Wiebe recently was, would the Jets be interested in Nazem Kadri from the Calgary Flames? And like I said, my gut instinct was, well, no. I thought, this didn't really make sense. I thought it'd be very expensive. Kadri is in his, middle 30s at this point, early to mid 30s. But in pro athlete years, that aging curve can really plummet very quickly. But for me, I've given it some more consideration, and maybe I'm not as hateful of it as I initially felt. The problem with Kadri is really in the contract term, right? So he's locked up for the foreseeable future. He's got another 4 years, I believe. About $7 million, which it's not cheap, right? And parts of those contract years also have some no movement, no trade kind of stuff. He's actually got a total of 5 years, so it's expensive, right? $7 million across the next 5 seasons. Some no movement stuff that kicks in, I believe, after this season. It's not a cheap contract. And Kadri, he hasn't always lived up to some of the, I would say, expectations over the years. I think that there were a couple of seasons with some other teams where, when he was in Toronto, he was nice as a 2C, but I don't think he ever quite hit the heights of what he was often described to be. Now, since joining Colorado and then Calgary, some of his recent seasons have been extremely productive. With Colorado, he was averaging almost 20 minutes a night towards the end of his stay there. And, in his third year as an Av, he had 87 points in 71 games, which is crazy. I don't really expect him to repeat anything like that. I think his career totals of around 50 to 60 points probably is what you'd expect from him. But then again, last season on a really dumpy Flames team, getting a little under 19 minutes a night, he had 75 points in 82 games. So just from a raw scoring perspective, you could actually argue that he'd be in the running for Winnipeg's 1C role. Scheifele is one of those guys who scores about a point per game. And to be honest, Kadri's actually not that far off. Recently, Nazem has kind of bounced a little bit up and down in terms of second line center to first line center production, relatively speaking, on the past couple of teams he's been with. I guess my biggest question is, say you trade for him right in this season, how much longer can he realistically sustain this? I think he's good. I think he's got the potential to be at a similar level, if, at worst, second line center level for like the next 3 or so seasons. After that, I think you're going to start to see a real dip. It may actually even hit earlier. He's always had a very physical style. The aging curve as you enter your 30s is not exactly kind. And it's hard to know exactly how much longer he's going to still be this productive. But if the Flames were trying to say, I don't know, eat some salary on this deal and cut bait with a big term contract, I wonder if you start to think about this maybe as where you try for your McGroarty upgrade. I know that people are probably going to look at that and say, well, no, I don't think I would want to do McGroarty for Kadri. And I don't entirely disagree. I think I would prefer to get younger in this case. But assuming that a package involving Kadri might be something that you go for, I kind of wonder if this is the fit. All that said, I'm probably personally against this deal. I think Kadri is a very good player. I don't really doubt that. I just think there's way too much risk with his age and the cap hit in term. He's signed for like another 5 years, including this upcoming season. That's a lot of time, and you're not going to be able to really move it once he arrives in Winnipeg. So for me, I just look at this deal and look, great player. In a past life, I might have said yes to this if he'd actually, signed with the Jets instead of Calgary. But as it is right now, I think the Jets maybe need to look elsewhere. Honestly, I think that they have internal options that might make perfect sense, but until they're willing to give those internal chances the best look, I guess we're just going to have to keep daydreaming. That's why I kind of thought Utah made some sense, because the Utah squad has some pretty reasonable talent at probably not exorbitant prices. And in terms of like cap flexibility, anything the Jets would get out of Utah would probably still give Winnipeg room to maneuver. I think that's something that's really underrated. I think it's a really big asset, especially as the cap ceiling continues to raise. But until the Jets kind of take advantage of that, we're mostly going to be waiting and probably trying to hope that one of our top prospects really seizes, the second line center role. I can tell you right now, I don't think it's going to be Lambert this year, and it's probably not even going to be next year. I like Brad a lot. I think it's going to be a lot to ask him to be your 2C immediately. I think he'll maybe grow into that if all goes well, but sometimes I think people maybe underestimate how hard it is to move into that particular spot. That is a very demanding role, a very tough spot for a young player, and I am just not quite there with him yet. I think he's got explosive potential. I think he's one of our most talented prospects, and I think he's a surefire star NHLer of some sort. I just don't know if it's going to be as a center, but he could surprise us. He's always been one of those kids who works really hard and constantly tries to improve. So I'm holding out hope and suggesting that, my read on this may be a little bit too pessimistic, but all I would say is I would just be a little bit cautious, a little bit patient, and let's see what Lambert does in his first rookie season. But let me know your thoughts about some of these trade partners and options. Do you like any of them? Are you more on the Kadri train? What do you think about Utah's potential trade roster players? Do you think McGroarty would go there? Drop your thoughts below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here this week for more Jets coverage. And, of course, as always, thanks for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.